You're watching Beyond Markets, where we bring you up to speed on development outcomes in Africa. Welcome, I'm Esther Awoniyi. On today's show, we'll find out how resilient Africa's hospitality sector can be in the face of the coronavirus outbreak. As always, you can join the conversation on social media. Let me know what you think about the topics we discuss. And to do so, use the hashtag Beyond Markets. You can also send a message to my Twitter handle. It's at Esther Awoniyi. As the world continues to be rattled with the coronavirus outbreak, the impact across some key economic sectors cannot be understated. Trevor Ward, Managing Director of W Hospitality Group, joins me to assess how resilient Africa's hospitality sector can be against this latest outbreak. Trevor, thank you for joining me today. Pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for inviting me here.
Quite interesting times that we're living in. The hospitality industry, the aviation industry has had to weather a number of storms over the last decade. We had Ebola, we had SARS, we had MERS or MERS, I guess depending on who's calling it. But I'm just wondering, this is sort of deja vu for those in that sector. But this is a virus that we're still learning so much about. And we've seen it's so widespread and contagious levels are so high that scientists, we're seeing them working round the clock to figure out more about this virus. But obviously, the hospitality industry is also feeling the pinch. Now, I know that the players within the sector, analysts, are still collecting data in terms of what the full impact will be, especially for Q1 when we begin to see Q1 numbers. But let me hear your thoughts in terms of how, being in the sector, how you're processing this and the extent to which this is impacting the sector.
Yeah, as you say, it's here we go again. But here in Nigeria or here in West Africa, 2014, we were hit by Ebola in the middle of the year, and then there seemed to be more and more external events, including recession and devaluation and the oil price all coming together one after the other. For the last couple of years, pretty much globally, it's been okay. And there's been growth in travel, growth in the hotel industry. And then bang, back in December, January. Very much uncharted territory. We don't know what's going on. We hear the numbers. We hear an awful lot of hype. Now, I'm not going to debate about whether the numbers are right or whether all the opinions about coronavirus, COVID-19 are correct. But what we do know is people are dying. And it is in 50 countries now, I think the latest, or probably that, more. Yeah. Probably more now. And what we're having to do is go back to what we did during Ebola and look at those processes that we went through and implement protection measures to do what we can in the unknown.
It would appear that this time, things appear to be more intense this time. As I said earlier, the contagious level is so high, it spreads so easily. And we're hearing, scientists tell us that people who are not even showing symptoms can even infect others. So obviously this is something, and I know that, yes, while we're still processing the numbers, I see many players within the sector erring on the side of caution. No one wants to take any chances, whether or not the numbers perhaps don't add up here and there. What do you think?
You put your finger on it there, that you or I could have it and we don't know. We don't show any symptoms. So to a large extent, when you see people screening for temperature, it's actually ineffective. It's good psychologically to show, we're doing something. And here in Lagos, we're filling in forms so that we can be tracked if, for example, the flight we come off, somebody is diagnosed. But the actual knowing somebody has got the COVID-19 is after the event when they could have affected people. And that's therefore affecting us in the hospitality sector. It's within and we don't know. So we have to be cautious without panicking.
Now let's look at some of the regions. Now I know that China, where this all started, is a very key market for the aviation, for the hospitality sector, especially the Chinese outbound market, especially even within the Asian region itself. I know that the Chinese are known for a very active travel. They're the biggest shoppers, etc. And we're seeing some hotels obviously having to shut down the Hilton is one of them, has shut down over 150 hotels. And I'm just wondering how the deep in bookings in the hotel sector there, if that could have a ripple effect to the rest of the regions.
Well, the Chinese are great travelers. Many of them have never been able to travel before. The wealth of the people, the middle class is growing, so they have the money, plus there were political restrictions before. The Chinese market's been growing exponentially, and many parts of the industry have been rubbing their hands and saying, oh yes, we'll cater to the Chinese market. And almost overnight that is cut off. You see, hospitality is a function of travel. The hotels are a function of travel. If people don't or can't travel, then the hotels will suffer. It is as simple as that. So flights to China, flights within China, have been cancelled. I was recently on Virgin Atlantic, and they were telling me Shanghai flights cancelled from London till the end of April, but the guy said probably going to be on later, and they've reduced their frequency into Hong Kong. Those are the two routes that they do. So if you can't travel because you're locked down, or the seats aren't there because the flights have been cancelled, then the hotels at the destination are going to suffer. You can't, so many flights now into China have been cancelled. What's the point of running a hotel when there are no guests, when your occupancy is virtually zero? You have to make the best of it and try and cut your costs.
Another interesting thing that I've seen happen so far, I think I mentioned this in the beginning too, the profit warnings that we're going to see from companies. Some companies are already issuing profit warnings. And IATA is yet to give us numbers for the first quarter. Obviously, we haven't ended the first quarter. But because we're in uncharted territory, because this virus there's still so much we're learning about this virus, and because also we're seeing more cases now happening outside of China. So it would appear, although China is obviously reporting some drop in cases, daily cases, it would appear that for the rest of the world, it's just beginning. And this is something that could last for the rest of the year. We've heard that, it could taper off in the summer because of the humidity, but some scientists are saying, look, as with what happened with SARS or the influenza, it could spike again in the fall. So just having to project that long for the entire year, how much difficult is it for, the sector to look at the scenario and say, wow, we could actually be handling this for the entire year? Has this happened before? I mean, thinking about back to SARS and Ebola,
well,
are we in for a longer ride?
We don't know. We can't project forward.
Well, are you preparing those kinds of scenarios, saying, look, we actually have to put together a scenario where this could be with us for the rest of the year?
Well, in terms of the precautions that a hotelier is taking, I mean, they are today and they will be tomorrow and the day after until they're not needed. We can't project forward to, say, September and say, oh, wow, it'll all be over by September. Nobody can do that, not in the hospitality sector, not in other sectors. But again, you see, people travel, people use hotels, which we're talking about as the hospitality industry. If a company is suffering because its revenues are down, one thing they can cut out is international travel. That may be because of cost, it may be because of health reasons, it's fear. Fear is the big word that's the elephant in the room here. So if they're not traveling, again, it's not necessarily because there is COVID-19 in the destination. It's because A, I'm cutting costs, or B, there's fear about the medical reasons. But in terms of the hotel industry, what can we do? We can make sure our hygiene standards are elevated. I mean, we're pretty good anyway, but elevate the hygiene standards, educating staff to make sure that the staff are washing their hands and that they know what the COVID-19 is all about. They can spot symptoms. As we say, there may not be any symptoms. What can we do about that? zero. Okay, but if we do, if a staff member does think somebody's got coronavirus, then there are policies, procedures in place to deal with it. And that's as much as we can do, other than close our doors, which would be catastrophic, unless we're in Wuhan and there's no travel and there's nothing happening.
Until then, keep the doors open, but of course maintain the highest possible standards of hygiene
and caution and education of your guests and your staff. Okay.
Now, a key component of the hospitality business is the MICE, meetings, conferences, and all of that, and so many so far have been cancelled.
Yeah.
What impact are we seeing, or should we expect from that side?
Well, let's take the hospitality industry, and this week, in fact, there were supposed to be two major events in Berlin. One was the International Hotel Investment Forum early in the week, and following that the ITB, International Tourism Bourse, one of the biggest Western European or European trade show. Both of them have been cancelled or postponed, whatever. They're certainly not happening. We're talking thousands of people, thousands and thousands of delegates and exhibitors and speakers and organisers, and pulling that from the city. Berlin's really hurting because whether they can claim on insurance or not, that's a moot point. Certainly in the UK, the government has to say this is a particular type of disease, and therefore the insurers will come on the show. Whether all the Berlin hoteliers and the restaurants and the taxis and everything that was just wiped out at a week's notice, that's hurt. That's big. And Frankfurt and the Geneva Motor Show and all those other events. MICE is a very important component of the industry for many, many cities. Here in Nigeria, it's important. In Lagos, it's important in Nigeria for the
But there are some regions that benefit a lot from it. Maybe perhaps due to size and just location, etc. Maybe a place like Europe, for instance. So would it be those regions? They would be the ones who hurt the most, based on the fact that they usually would have higher numbers. And we're seeing Europe, especially a place like Italy, the second biggest, or if not the biggest, in Europe right now in terms of the number of cases.
Well, tourism of all sorts is drying up in those locations, whether it's MICE or otherwise. You've got villages in lockdown. Whether they were tourism destinations, I don't know, but Milan hotels are way down. So it's this whole fear, and China, as I said, its availability of flights to actually fly within or to China. So we're the hospitality industry at the end of the travel chain.
If you're just joining us, Trevor Ward, Managing Director of the W Hospitality Group, is our guest today on the show, and we have been discussing Africa's hospitality sector in the face of the coronavirus outbreak. Trevor, thank you for your time so far.
Thank you.
Let's focus more on Africa now, and in terms starting with the numbers that we know of so far. Just 2 in Algeria, I think 2 in Egypt, 2 in Senegal, and 1 in sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria. So obviously the numbers in Africa are low. Is this
surprising?
Surprisingly low. And although there have been reassurances across the continent, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, that there are available testing kits, and we don't appear to have any community spread at the moment. So things appear right now, as we speak, to be under control and okay. But what does that mean for the hospitality sector here? Obviously, it's good news. It doesn't appear that there is widespread fear and paranoia here yet, anyways. But how are you processing how Africa, the numbers that are here so far?
I can talk about Nigeria.
Okay.
That's where I live and work most. But the hotels are seeing a reduction in the number of international visitors. Now, why is that? Because it's not the fact that we have COVID-19 in Nigeria. We have one case, and we know exactly who it was, and happened to be an Italian, where Italy is very, very badly affected, who came in and was immediately quarantined and it looks like we have a good quarantine facility in Lagos. And there's been no reported spread from that guy who came in. So it's not fear of coming to Nigeria and catching COVID-19. It's, first of all, that companies are stopping travel, cost or fear. The other important thing is that people are afraid of getting locked down. So, for example, you have the example of the Tenerife Hotel, where there was an Italian guest who had coronavirus. The hotel's locked down. Yeah, but I'm going home. No, you're not. You're staying here, you're in quarantine. Okay, Tenerife is a bit better than some other cities to be there, but you don't want to be there anyway. So it's that fear that if I travel for my 2-3 day business trip, is it going to be a 2-day quarantine if it happens? Mm-hmm. I don't want to be there. Okay, look at what happened to the cruise ship, for goodness sake. I mean, awful. Just must have been a terrible. So that has reduced international travel to the region. It hasn't reduced so much domestic travel, domestic business travel. They don't have the same kind of concerns. They don't have the same fear. But there has been a reduction in events.
So it's not exactly business as usual, even though the risk appears to be lower.
It's not business as usual. If you are a hotel which is primarily catering to domestic business visitors, not much, if any, impact. If you have a lot of international visitors to your hotel, and actually most hotels in Lagos and Abuja do not cater to many international visitors. It's actually domestic market. But if you have a high international mix, then you're hurting. Cancellations, but also the hotels are at the beginning of the month, and they typically know what's going to happen during the month, that they're going to get these reservations and these reservations and these reservations. The pickup is very low, so people are just not booking.
But I mean, you did mention that the international, we're not seeing the international travels coming into the continent. I mean,
there's a lower number.
I want to ask if that is significant, because obviously each year hoteliers put that as a factor. They put it in terms of what they're expecting, the international travel
into their budget. Yeah.
Into their budget. So if that is excluded now, is that a huge impact on the budget?
For some hotels, yes. For other hotels, no.
Okay, so but then I'm just wondering, for the hoteliers that are here, what are they doing? Are they preparing for? Yes, we're not in a crisis yet, but are they preparing for worst case scenarios?
They're doing what they can. In terms of a reduction in business, there's not a lot you can do. You look at your cost base, obviously, and sadly that tends to be staffing. So if you don't hire, you don't replace, you keep that as low as possible. You look at your cost base. But in terms of prevention and you make sure your staff are fully aware of what it means, what it is, what it means, how it is spread.
Just like would businesses be referring back to, I'm not sure if there was a protocol book for when there was Ebola on the continent. Will management be going back to that protocol?
Yes, very much so. That is really our benchmark, our experience in 2014 of Ebola. This is the two are not the same, but hey, we're still going to be screening guests to some extent, and with the temperature guns and the masks and the sanitizer. But sometimes we just don't know whether somebody's got it. Ebola was very obvious. Ebola, you knew somebody had Ebola. That's the difference between this and dealing with COVID-19. But to me, it's the staff. It's making sure the staff who are there all the time and looking at the guests and looking after the guests, that they're aware and understand what it's all about. Yeah.
I remember the last time you were here, I mean, our conversation was basically about, how the hotel industry, especially in Africa, has evolved, and we're projecting. I think we did like a 5-year projection in terms of the numbers that we should expect, the new hotel builds here, the number of bed expansions that we're expecting here, and I'm just wondering, to what extent, I mean, would you be going back to have a second look at those projections and say, even though and I suppose it will make it even more tricky, especially since we're still right in the middle of what is happening now. We don't know when it's going to end, and I get to a point where we would say, okay, we're prepared to be getting to the tail end of this, so we can begin to write down the numbers and tweak the projections and say maybe in the next 5 years, if we expected like a 5% growth based on what was happening now, it's probably going to be a 3% growth in the next 5 years for the growth of the industry. How hard is it going to be for you at this point to begin to say, oh, okay, that 5-year projection that we had, we might need to review it, but perhaps also you may not also be able to review it yet because you're not in a position to do so.
Yeah,
but what do you suspect?
Well, you're reviewing your forecasts all the time, and clearly, within a business, one would have made before the end of last year, one would have made a 12-month budget for 2020. Now, you don't just leave that alone. You reforecast on a regular basis. And yes, everybody is going to be downgrading their forecast of what they thought they were going to achieve. Those hotels which have a slower pickup in March than they thought it was going to be, they're not going to make budget in March, so they've got to reforecast and the revenues, the profits, and the cash. How far forward do you do it? Again, it's I don't know. We don't know. Some people say I would agree that it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's a non-medical opinion, obviously. But our assumption would be that we're going to come out of it. Maybe we would say 2 to 3 months. Maybe we'd say end of Q1 or end of Q2 because that's a convenient slot. But we're not going to continue, we're not going to be reforecasting budgeting now for it to carry on and on and on and on and on.
Absolutely.
History says that's not what happens, that we will rebound. And certainly I believe that for the Lagos industry and other, not just any business city, there's kind of pent-up demand. So you can't travel now, well, I'm going to travel then when it's all over, and we bounce back very quickly, and we've seen that many times within the industry. We do.
Did that happen during Ebola? When Ebola?
Yes, we bounced back.
The first time.
Yeah, in 2014, we bounced back quite quickly. We were declared Ebola free in November. Of course, that was hitting up to Christmas, but it did come back. It did come back in November, December. The business. If you look at I mean, not virus related, but if you look at the Egyptian hotel industry, has constantly had attacks, on tourists. We have a very short memory. The Egyptian tourism is doing fine, thank you, despite all that's happened over the last years. People are travelling to Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea, which were so badly affected by Ebola. It was absolutely tragic. But we go past it, and we in the hospitality industry, we're very resilient. We bounce back.
Last time you were here, we also talked about investment prospects for new entrants into the markets and all of that. Where does that leave any of this?
I don't believe it impacts at all, because we are hotels, hospitality. It's a long-term investment play. You've got to think long-term. That for coronavirus, we are thinking short term. We are thinking it will play itself out in a matter of months. So if you're investing in the middle of an investment now, you're not going to stop. You're going to carry on. If you're thinking of a new investment, you're thinking of something that might open in 2, 3, 4 years' time. So I don't see an impact on the investment.
Okay, let me just squeeze in one more question. If the coronavirus wasn't a factor in our conversation today and you were here, I would have been asking you about, because this is the first time you're here this year, I would have been asking you for trends in the sector this year, what we can expect. I don't know if I can still ask you that question, or if the COVID-19 has, just put a different spin on that.
We were going great. If you track back in the Lagos hotel industry, the Nigerian hotel industry. 2016 was our worst year. We were on our knees. We climbed and climbed and climbed, and we continued to climb back out of the nadir in that time. And January was a great month for Nigeria. All of last year was fantastic. January it continued, and we thought, we're great, we're back, we're doing so well. February probably wasn't that bad, but March is being hit. We'll be back.
Okay. Hopefully I'll have you back, and we'll be having a totally different conversation. Thank you, Trevor, for joining us today. Trevor Ward, Managing Director of W Hospitality Group. That's our show for today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of the show on our website. That's cnbcafrica.com. From myself and the team, it's bye for now.